In accordance with the customs of this university, I open the ceremony with a prayer. Spiritus Sancti Gratias Illuminat Sensus et Cordia Nostra. Please take a seat. Welcome to the defense of Ms. Sitohang, in which we will, the opposition will ask questions, and next to me are the promoters and co-promoters who will not ask a question. Next to me, Professor Ernste, then Dr. Smith and Dr. van der Velde. I now give the floor to the candidate for the degree of doctor.
I'd like to share my PowerPoint. With the permission of the doctorate board and in order to obtain the degree of doctor from Radboud University, Nijmegen, I would like to defend in public my dissertation entitled Cross-border Interaction in the Context of Border Regional Development in Kalimantan. Garuda is on my chest, Malaysia is in my stomach. Ironi warga krayan, jiwa Indonesia, perut Malaysia. The irony of krayan local, Indonesian souls, Malaysian stomach. A piece of headline news published by CNN Indonesia on the 17th of August 2016. This article has intrigued me for two reasons. First, it reports the local sense of belonging to Indonesia. On the other hand, their reliance on Malaysia for their daily necessity due to the insufficient development in the region. Second reason, of all the date of the 17th of August has been chosen for this article to be published, a date that recalls a battle fought for independence from the colonization in the past, that is, the Indonesia Independence Commemoration Day. What is so important from this article to my research is that right from the beginning, the article highlights the dual reality of the Krayan border inhabitants is viewed as an irony, and it is being highlighted as the peak moment where the sense of national adoration felt strongly in Indonesia. This dual reality and the national identity that is associated with it have been the starting and end points of my research. At the Kalimantan border, an area straddling between Indonesia and Malaysia, also stretches from the west to the northeast, cutting across Borneo Island, the cross-border interaction have been part and parcel of the everyday life of the local inhabitants, the so-called Dayak. In Krayan region, situated at the highlands of Kalimantan and also home to Dayak Lundaya ethnic group, the geographical feature of the region has inevitably hindering a close interaction to the Indonesian capital. This is proven by the accessibility from and to the region is limited with small aircraft, while accessibility to the region from Malaysia is territorially possible. In terms of development, many Indonesian development approaches have aimed at promoting the improvement of Indonesian population welfare through the availability of good infrastructure, a purpose that is stemmed from the manifestation of a modern state. In Indonesia, this development mandate is embedded in the national development spirit, which is represented by Garuda Pancasila. Accordingly, the developments are often implemented through road construction, the provisions of healthcare, supply of electricity, the building of schools, and the availability of government subsidies, or in general, physical infrastructural development projects. Furthermore, the Krayan locals border crossing have been associated with insufficient development in the region. This is often supported by the relative success of the development performance and also by the poor quality of the development projects in the region. To a certain extent, the insufficient development is intertwined with the ongoing local border crossing, particularly in terms of meeting their welfare needs. The locals crossing toward Malaysia to meet their welfare, specifically their daily necessities, it seems to be problematic by those who live in the capital. The locals are perceived to be not loyal to the national state. This circumstance brings implications to a prominent nationalism sentiment over locals border crossing in the region. My research objective is essentially to investigate what is the relationship between cross-border interaction and border regional development in Kalimantan, focusing in Krayan. In order to achieve this research objective, I broke down my research questions into 5 research questions as follows. 1. What is the historical geographical context of the Krayan border region? 2. What is the arena of access in post-development in Krayan? 3. What cross-border interactions take place out of Krayan and how are they perceived by Krayan locals? 4. How do Krayan locals perceive and relate to the state of development of the region? And 5. How does cross-border interaction play a role in border regional development and vice versa? The cross-border interaction phenomena, I argue, can be analyzed using border crossing dynamics provided in my dissertation. By taking into account the socio-economic positioning inhabitants and with the border regional development as a context, as well as identity as a contributing element that energizes border crossings, the dynamics of border crossing can be observed. The dynamics here represent an intersection of the state rules and the social practice that is mediated by certain established rules. Such dynamics capture a degree of compliance, or if you like, a degree of incompliance to the rules, which can be differentiated as cross-border interaction that is accepted and contested. In order to investigate the research questions, I employed an ethnographic approach along with a survey. I was able to conduct 2 times fieldwork. In the first fieldwork, it was more on an exploratory purpose, and the second fieldwork was for an in-depth work. In my first fieldwork, I traveled across the province of Kalimantan Utara in order to single out an ongoing cross-border interaction in the region. In my second fieldwork, I visited Krayan region and I lived with one of the local households. By doing so, I was able to participate in some of the local activities. These include, I joined the village meetings, a bachelor graduation party, religious services. I was also able to join a group of locals who traveled across Sulawesi, the nearest Malaysian town, and also a town that is often referred by the locals as one of the destinations whenever they're heading to Malaysia. Further, I've interviewed with officials from the regional level. This includes those at the regency, district, as well as the province level. I also interviewed the Krayan locals. I did community discussions and also administered questionnaires to the respondents. Along with the research questions in my study, following is my research findings. 1. Krayan as border region in the study is a territorial area that is located far away from the central part of the state. This depiction can be approached through the region's geographical isolation to Indonesia and the historical context of the Indonesia state formation. 2. Border regional development in the study initially is regarded with security and defense. It later shifted to promoting the improvement of the population welfare, which involves various actors, namely government, religious leaders, customary leaders, and armed forces. 3. The cross-border interaction is perceived to be instrumental to serve the local needs, namely relational motivations, economic intentions, and socio-cultural reasons. 4. To the locals, the government interventions are prominent in terms of improving the lives of the people in the region. even though they have mixed feelings in terms of the relative success of the development project. And 5, to the locals, it is partly their dissatisfaction with state-led development projects in the Krayan region that prompted their ongoing border crossings. Based on these research findings, I can then draw conclusions as follows. 1. The cross-border interaction is not necessarily influencing the border regional development in the Kalimantan border region and vice versa. 2. The relationship between the two can be made clear by understanding that border is not limited to state outcomes imposed by state demarcation. Rather, border is seen as a fluid process resulted by cultural practices and energized by identity. 3. The differentiation of cross-border dynamics in my analysis helps to better examine nuances of different levels of compliance by the locals to the state rules. To the locals, they still look up to Indonesia, but it is inevitable to not cross the border for their everyday needs. This situation is often expressed by the respondents, Garuda di dadaku, Malaysia di perutku. Garuda is on my chest, Malaysia in my stomach. Having presented the summary of my dissertation, I return the floor to the rector.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Professor Lagendijk from this university.
Thank you, dear Rector. Lydia, I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, you can hear me? Okay. I hear some echo, but I'll try my best to speak slowly. Thank you. Thank you for this great presentation. Thank you for having been our colleague for many years, showing your passion for research, also for teaching, being a close colleague and friend to many of us. I think that has really been wonderful. And thank for this great book, which I think reads as a novel, at least for me, with so many great details about the country and an area I'm not familiar with, and it really came close. It was really very nice to read your thesis. Yeah. But I'll start with certain opening questions, and then it's your task to respond. I would like to zoom out from Kalimantan and to look at the whole world. A world full of borders. And I would like to ask you, so what is the applicability of your research for other areas and other borders? And especially other big islands, which are also split into 2 state areas. So we can think about New Guinea, yeah, where of course also is partly Indonesian territory, and Papua New Guinea. We can think about Hispania, where you find Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and perhaps close to home, Ireland, with Ireland and Northern Ireland. To what extent is your research applicable to those border areas? And to what extent can you think of other places in the world where your research would be particularly applicable and relevant?
Sure. Thank you for your kind words. It's a very good opening question. I would like to answer your first question. To what extent that my research is applicable to the other borders in the world? I would argue that my research that is in Kalimantan, that has a historical background that was colonized by the European colonizers in the past, might have been the legacy from the colonial time, and these might be the thread lines to the other countries that have similar historical background. In my literature review, I came across to some most of the Southeast Asian countries, with exception in Thailand, The state arrived in these countries nowadays was due to the expansion of the colonization in the past. This could be one of the characteristics that my research might be applicable in shaping the characteristic of border that can be also investigating on. And your questions will also refer to what extent my research will be applicable to a country that is split by an island. Am I getting it correct? I would argue that my research might not be able to completely applicable to some of borders in the that exist that separated in the island, because my research is now in principle based on territorial border that is between Malaysia and Indonesia in Kalimantan. I admit this is one of the limitations of my research. Nevertheless, the novelty that I could offer from my dissertation is that offering a framework in investigating the dynamics of border crossing, that taking into account the state's role, in this case, the state rules in terms of the crossing, as well as taking into account the perceptions of the border crossers. In this case, is the local inhabitants. So, in many cases, the border that was imposed during the colonization did not take into account that there had been a population that actually inhabited the area. So I would argue that that would be at least the two novelties that can be generalized, can be applicable to other border research.
Yeah. Okay, so you argue that both the colonial historical history and the demography and its territoriality make a special case.
I would argue so. And I would like also to add the work of Willem van Schendel. He is inspiring me in a way. He is investigating a border that is located at the highlands that is stretches along the Southeast Asia. He's specifically on the geographical feature of border that is situated at the highlands. Yeah. It could be one of the elements that can add up to the generalizability of my thesis.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's very clear. I have a second question, if the chair allows me. Yes. Okay. I would like you to reflect on your position as a researcher. Yeah. And the way that your gender, your nationality, your status as an academic, and perhaps other aspects might have influenced the outcomes of your research and might even have caused a bias. Things that people have shared with you in the interviews or documentation that you have found, but also things that that might not have been shared or that you might have missed. Can you reflect on the way you as a researcher might have had influence on the outcomes of your research?
Sir, another good question from you. I admit that I'm departing from someone who is originated from Kalimantan, and to me it also sounds promising because I've never done this before, especially at the border of Kalimantan Island. Specifically, then, how is my position as a female researcher, as an Indonesian myself, but also conducting my research in Nijmegen or in Netherlands, who has a special record in the past, and then how then I overcome the bias. I would argue that based on the research questions that I posed in this dissertation, I tried to focus on the dynamics of the relationship between the cross-border interactions and with the border regional development. My position as a female might be the case as a challenge for me to approach the areas that often dominated by patriarch culture. However, I was able to approach this community in such a way that I could engage with them. I did try to approach female respondents or the population in the area. I had a polite decline that they referred to me. It would be nice to be able to speak to the leader of the region. These ladies, they were very friendly at the opening of the speech, but as soon as the conversation getting to be more topical or more serious, they would refer to me as to the local leaders, this including the village heads or the customary leaders.
Yeah.
And there might be an argument that my position as a Kalimantan people or person might be biased, but that can also offer an in-depth insight, a rich, full reality, how actually the meaning of the border crossing experienced by the locals. Because so far, according to my literature reviews, most of the border studies in Kalimantan often taking the outsider's perspective. So I'm offering something that hopefully more in-depth, more meaningful information as a Kalimantan, one of the Kalimantan populations myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a nice balanced answer. And I hand back to our chair.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Dr. Schulpen.
Thanks. Dear candidate, I fully agree with my neighbor, by the way. It was a pleasure reading your dissertation. And I also particularly like the title, at least the subtitle. I would have turned it around, by the way, but maybe that's because of disciplines. But I think that in that subtitle, in 10 words, you actually summarize your findings of your thesis very nicely. Now, you have included quite a lot of issues in your thesis, whether that's on economic development, on the role of the state, the formation of the nation state, cultural and family traditions, nationalism, etc., etc., etc. So it creates the opportunity to actually ask quite a lot of questions. I'm not going to do that, but I would like to zoom in on development and the role of the state. On page 49, you define development, and I quote, as the attempts of the state in sustaining the citizens' welfare. And that means a state that creates, and that's still a quote, creates and maintains favorable conditions for economic development. So that means the state as a development facilitator. That idea is strengthened when I read on page 227 that, and I quote again, border crossing is a direct response to the insufficient state-led development. Now, it makes me wondering what kind of state-led development would be needed and for what exactly. So with regard to the kind of state-led development needed, your answer remains very abstract. Because on that same page, that's 227, you then say, you talk about routinized acts that enable progress towards a desired development. That doesn't really help me, that sentence. So my first question is, what these routinized acts should be according to you? Put differently, and I invite you to add to the 3 research recommendations with which you end your dissertation, to add to those 2 policy recommendations for the state in its role as a development facilitator. So what should that government actually do? And at the same time, I invite you to answer the why question. So at the same time, explain what any of these actions that you would like the government to do in terms of border crossing, what they actually should accomplish. Should they prevent, for instance, contested border crossing? Should they stimulate accepted border crossing? Should they do something completely different? So put differently, what exactly are the border crossing problems that any development intervention by the state is going to solve? Is that question, are the questions clear?
I'm afraid I would need your favor to again refresh your questions and maybe a little bit summarize.
Okay.
Because as far as I could understand, so you were questioning what kind of one of the questions that you posed to me, what kind of development that is needed for the cross-border, for the border region that the government needs to do. Am I correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So I will try to answer this. Sir, in Indonesia context, the development in general, as I was already mentioning in my presentation, is focusing at the promotion or promoting the population welfare with the availability of good infrastructure. I might rephrase this a little bit different from my book for the sake of time, but the idea behind it is that the Indonesian government is facilitating the population in terms of the public infrastructure so that the population may reach the point of welfare. This development is general the whole in Indonesia, but things were different during the current presidency, Joko Widodo, that he focused on the development at the margin areas. So then, approximately 5 years ago, the development shifted, not only generalizing that the public infrastructure has to be built equally or no differentiation. But ever since the government actually implemented such policy, then there was a specification to focus on the border. However, the intention is there. The reality, it took a lot of extra attention, and I would consider that I would argue there have been also trial and error to see whether this development policy actually fits into the border regional development, because in one of my interviews with the provincial official, he was elaborating that as a provincial official, I cannot to pay attention to one specific region, because we are now comprising of 5 cities and then 1 municipality. We have to treat everyone equally. However, he also admits that it comes down to the budget that development allocated for. So they allocated the budget to the region. However, in terms of the physical distance between the client that is remote from the central region, it resulted in the excessive transaction cost. The materials that is needed to improve the infrastructure project, not the same with the price that the other agency would pay. So what is then needed for the government to focusing on the client? I would say recognize that there is a specification, there is a very focused particularities in client region, that even before the state formed, there has been cross-border interaction between the two communities that actually support the life of the inhabitants out of their stations in terms of geographical to keep living in the borders, to survive, so to say. And rather than focusing on the issue of nationalism, why don't acknowledge? I would emphasize acknowledge and recognize as much as cliche it is, as long as it's not yet implemented, by being applied in the government policy. I would keep emphasizing, recognize the duality might be one of the potential of development, and the first that work to try for the sake of Krayan that is isolated geographically from Indonesia, but accessible through Malaysia.
If I may, Lydia, if I may, I mean, okay, the government should recognize that this cross-border is happening and et cetera, but that's very easy for the government to do, isn't it? So what else should they do anything except recognizing it? Is there any program that would be needed, and for what then exactly? Or should the government actually not be a facilitator at all, and should they actually withdraw from the area? Is there anything concrete that the government could do or should do?
Sure, thank you for the refreshment. The government already did as far as I could follow. They focus on the border as far as the early stage of the state formation in terms of the security and defense and the improvement of these public infrastructures and also the improvement of their human resources. The government did and have been undergoing this effort. I mean, yes, there's still some dissatisfaction with the government role, but I would argue leaving behind government roles in the development would not be also so much helpful, but their role still is considered to be significant in the development process. So I would say commitment to keep focusing on border regions with its uniqueness. It is still important, and hopefully in the coming next presidency, the government project will still focus on the development of the remote areas.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for your answer, and I now give the floor to Dr. Otsuki from Utrecht University.
Where is Lydia? Oh, you're there. Hello. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity and for your nice thesis. I've enjoyed reading that. Really, also, it's a very rich and historical institutional descriptions of the Kalimantan. And I'm also starting a new research project there with all the colleagues from Indonesia about the capital relocation of Indonesia. So now it's going to move from Jakarta to Kalimantan. So I was very, sort of inspired by learning about the region. So my question is, rather following up my previous opponent about the notion of development in the area, that, I have a feeling that, for example, any marginal areas of a country which doesn't border with another country, any country has a peripheral region far from the national center, they feel abandoned, they feel sort of less developed themselves. So I was wondering that you say in many times in your thesis that due to indeed insufficient development, people are pushed to cross border. But can't you say also that because they cross border and they have an opportunity to actually compare development with another national context, that they understand or recognize what is development, and there's something is insufficient in their views. So my question is, can you think about what people actually learn and from cross-border interaction or by going to Malaysia, what do they actually reflect on development or their development?
Other Madam, thank you for your kind words. Yeah, to your questions, I'm agree with your opinion that by crossing the border, the Krayan locals actually have the idea, the development, the advance of development, so to say, in Malaysia, and then they compare it to their own region. Apart that they also compare their region to the other peripheral areas in Indonesia. I do agree with this. And in fact, this has been quite mentioned by the respondents. They keep comparing. Lydia, if we are going to Malaysia, whenever I'm visiting my family, of course, I'm also doing shopping, but look at the road. The road construction always comes at the first element that they refer to. Look, at least during my data collection in the period 2014 and 2015, the road in Krayan was full of muddy soil when it is raining, and it was very dusty when there is no rain. I couldn't really say there is a distinction between rainy or dry season because the orographic rain often influence the road conditions in Krayan. Whenever the locals refer to Malaysia, look at the road, ma'am. Look how smooth the asphalt that they have, even though it was still in the border region, but still they managed. And second point, they would also referring to the cheap prices of the basic groceries. They often referring to the sugar, coffee. It's so affordable. If they could buy 1 kilo's sugar in Indonesia, Krayan, I mean, then for them, if they buy with the same price, they could probably get 1.5 package more than in Indonesia. And these are two things. And other amenities that this respondents would also mention in terms of the education. This my respondents might not be able to access the education due to the citizen rights. They are not part of the Malaysian citizenship, but they would also refer the family members who have children who actually attend schools there. They would compare. Look, they were teaching those children English, and they could really, wear a clean uniform. And look at us. We couldn't even get these books that have to be taught in this term. The books are now stuck somewhere in Tarakan, the port city. So they would refer at least these three qualities: road construction and the basic needs, and also the education. These are three things that would often come up during the reflections what is considered to be developed between Malaysia and Indonesia.
Then your answer actually makes me wonder why would they be then so Garuda in the chest? I mean, why would they be so patriotic to Indonesia? Or why don't they just migrate to Malaysia, for example?
Anna, madam, to answer your question, I do recall strongly this respondent particularly enthusiastic when he welcomed me about my question, and he actually challenged me. So, ma'am, you're not living here. You're not living in the border. I mean, who are you? Look, I've been living in here in Krayan. We don't have electric supply 24 hours. The electric supply only operated between 6 in the afternoon to 12. And yet, still I'm in here. And look, our road construction is not smooth. And I can manage. So never underestimate me. I'm the safeguard of this country. I am here. I'm just standing right at the margin of the country. So when he told me about this, I could feel his passion, like I'm the guard of this country. And never underestimate my nationalism feeling, that it resembles patriotic, to the other Indonesian citizens, because nobody can stand in this situation, but I choose to be in here. Yes, there is offers. It is a very lucrative to go to Malaysia, but this is my ancestral land. Here is my family. So this respondent, with his enthusiasm and then with his straightforwardness, also give me the understanding he is proud to be Indonesian. It is represented by the Garuda, often put in the chat. But he also admits his need that he relies on the Malaysians. But this duality is becoming the values of these Garuda di Dadaku managed with these problems.
And I have, well, can I follow up that? Because as I mentioned, now the
very short, please.
Yeah, sorry. So the capital city is going to move, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, what do you think of the consequence of that nationalism that people have over there? Do you think they will be happy, or you think?
Madam, I could tell how blissful the respondents when they know that the capital city was about to move. It was in 2014. I would say during my 2 times fieldwork, I encountered 2 different impressions. In 2014, it felt like, you know what? Any government, they've been in the province of Kalimantan Utara, but never once come to Krayan. They even have this term, only angels probably one day will visit us. But in 2016, when I had this fieldwork, I came across 2 intelligence officials. They were like in a serious talk. I wouldn't say it was a meeting, but it was a very serious talk that we were here to prepare our presidency thesis. It was in 2016.
Thank you. Please, thank you for this clear answer, and I hope Dr. Otsuki is happy with the answer. I now give the floor to Professor Yuwono from Universiteit Gadjah Mada in Indonesia.
Thank you, Professor. Dear Promovendus, dear Mbak Lidya, first of all, is of course a big congratulations for your dissertation. There are years of hard work. Eventually, your effort comes to a fruition, and it is a good fruit indeed. I really enjoyed reading your thesis on the cross-border activities among the Krayans to learn how a state-building project is basically a project plagued by internal paradoxes that, in effect, prevented the aim of the project to be accomplished. Indonesia as a state is widely imagined as a geographically self-contained socio-political, economic, cultural entity, as presented in the official map of the state of the country with its thick border map. Yet in everyday practice, the border is porous. Even when every village along the border is heavily guarded, there are plenty of jalan tikus, mouse path, illegal path around the village that people use at their will. Perhaps in your next academic work, you can tell us more about this illegal yet widely known jalan tikus, because I didn't find much elaboration on this topic in your dissertation. To follow the text of critics tradition, the meaning of explicit sentences are often defined by the implicit unsaid unwritten ones. The role of borders, Indonesian-Malaysian borders, is often defined by this jalan tikus rather than by the official border control. Or to follow Elfring government, it is hard for us to properly understand a social life if we just observe it from the front stage, because there is a big, highly complicated social machinery that produces the script in the backstage. So it seems to me Jalan Tikus is the backstage of Indonesian, border, Indonesian-Malaysian borders. Just read, if you read the history of ethnography and history of European states, then you will find a lot of similarities. And I have two questions. My first question is, reading your thesis reminds me of the Bhinneka Tunggal Ika paradox. You mentioned about Garuda Pancasila, and there's a Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity. And it is a paradox, the paradox of uniting things that are obviously different to each other. Why is it why is the Indonesian government willing to compromise its own constitution on the actual standing of its citizen before the law, by granting two types of traveling documents, a border pass for the Krayan and other border communities, and passport for other Indonesian like me and you. We can only cross in Indonesian border with passport that will in Krayan. They are also Indonesian. They can pass in the border with a simple border pass. In your work, you mentioned the concept of ethnic nation and civic nation. I would like to know from you to what extent this concept can be operated in understanding this inconsistency the Indonesian government of granting two different passes for Indonesian citizens. Yeah.
Honor, sir. Honor, sir, thank you for your kind words, and I appreciate your suggestions. Had I a chance to conduct research in the future, I would love to focusing on this Jalan Tikus. Indeed, it is the border in Indonesia is pretty porous, and only focusing on the record that is based on this office might not be sufficient to actually represent how porous the Indonesian border is. Coming to your question, what is what does it mean for me that the government is willing to compromise the life of the border inhabitants by providing them with a border crossing pass and also the passport, two different legal documents to facilitate this situation. I would argue that it is the specificity in border itself that actually being embraced by the government, by our government, Indonesia. I could recall in one of my literature reviews that the border crossing pass was not actually exist before 1957. At the time, the border crossing pass was simply not exist because there was no particular attention. However, during the growing of situations of the development, even though Indonesia at the early stage, but the development has been ongoing. And then in 1957, there was a border trade agreement. This agreement to actually facilitate the locals of the two state borders to be more accommodated in terms of fulfilling their daily life. This is based on the limitations of the situation in Kalimantan border, so to say, that is relatively isolated from Indonesian capital, but it is more accessible to Malaysia. So then this specificity, border crossing pass, then only appears somewhere in 1970s when the cooperation between the two, Indonesia and Malaysia, developed from the border trade agreement into Sosek Malindo. So this border crossing pass come as one of the outcome, one of the legal documents that can actually facilitate the border inhabitants in Krayan, so that they can have the sense of secure if they're going to Malaysia, not being criminalized, so to say, because this is also regarding their shared cultural background, hence the border crossing pass. And yeah, I think that would be my question, my answer to your first question. To your
okay, thank you for this legal history explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, my second question is, Krayan is a specific type of community in Kalimantan studies. Yeah? As far as I know, it is among the few hinterland Dayak communities who base their economy on intensive rice cultivation.
Yeah.
The other communities are mainly Sweden cultivators. To what extent intensive rice cultivation among the Krayan influence their cross-border activities? For instance, intensive rice cultivation is always accompanied by high population density, which in turn motivates people to migrate and engage in trading, etc., and so on and so forth. If there is a special relationship between intensive rice cultivation and cross-border activities, then very likely your work, this work, occupies a specific place in Kalimantan border studies. What is it? What is the speciality of Krayan compared to other communities along the borders? The time is here.
Understood. Sorry that I would also reflect first that the Indonesian territorial border stretches not only in Kalimantan, but not only in Kalimantan Utara, but also stretches along the Kalimantan Barat and then Kalimantan Timur. So focusing on Kalimantan border between Indonesia and Malaysia, the specificity of Dayak Leung ethnic group, which is the largest community in comparison to the other ethnic group residing along the Kalimantan border, is that I believe you that was also part of your explanation. They were relying on these hunting and then cultivation, shipping cultivation. But with the Dayak Leung community group, since they were residing at the highlands, and this also affects how they actually interact with the geographical surface. So they even though they could not really recall when was it started that they actually cultivate this paddy rice, the so-called adan, but they, as far as they could remember, this has been the legacy of their ancestors, apart from hunting, apart from migrating in terms of accessing the forest resources, food. I think the specialty that the fact that there is a sedentary paddy field which might not exist in other Kalimantan border. I have to admit that my reading in other part of Kalimantan border in terms of Kalimantan Barat limited to the Dayak Iban. So I did not.
Thank you, please. Thank you for your answer. I hope Professor Yuwono is happy with your answers. And I now give the floor to Dr. Schapendonk from this university.
Dear candidate, dear Lydia, as you can see, I'm not Maggie Leung, and I'm just her replacement. But it's nevertheless a pleasure to be part of this committee. And it's the best excuse to have read your thorough and a strong thesis. Congratulations. But it's also a pleasure to be here because you have been, as Arnold also, Professor Lagendijk referred to, have been our colleague for several years, and therefore it's also very much a shame that you cannot be here because of visa troubles. You are one of us, basically. My question is about who decides what's a good move and what's not so good move. Who decides about what's a legitimate border crossing and what's not so much a legitimate border crossing. In Chapter 2, you roughly distinguish accepted from contested border crossings. And here I feel you mainly follow the logics of the state. If it's in compliance with the state rules, then it's considered legal and legitimate. If not, it's contested and sometimes called illegal. From this position, I had another look at your cover. And I felt a little bit like a border guard and was guessing, is this smile of this guy on the left, is this smile hiding something? Is he a good traveler or is he a bad traveler? On the same extent, you could argue, is this more stringent face on the guy on the right, is that the good traveler or not? So I felt like a border guard. And in chapter 6, I actually entered a very different world. There I entered the world of the people, not the state. And there you write that 1/3 of the people do not have the border pass that the state requires them to have. 1/3 of the people do not use it, do not have it. So apparently this suggests to me that there are other frameworks to judge what's a legitimate move and not so legitimate move. So my question is, why did you opt for the state lens to make this differentiation? And as a follow-up, do you think that the picture of accepted versus contested mobility would have been very different if you had started from a community perspective? Thank you.
Understood. Thank you for your kind words and to your question. Who decides who's being good, who's being not good? I just put it straightforward. Who's decided being good or bad? It is a matter of context, because in my research, I'm focusing on the cross-border interaction due to the insufficient development in terms of improving the welfare of the population in the region. So I would like to depart that being good or bad, it comes down to this purpose, meeting the welfare needs. And I differentiate the compliance of the border crossing intentions to these state rules as one of the characteristics how this being good or bad actually is a matter of momentum. It has to be decided based on the context and purpose. So so I differentiated into the accepted and contested, and it is all based on the compliance to the state rules, but also to the practices, the social practices. So when we talk about social practices, often it's not only about being legitimate or illegitimate, but what is licit or illicit. So just because something is being illegal does not make it not licit. I mean, these realities exist in a real world. So in my theoretical framework, I would like to actually highlight if we ever get this capturing this moment, like I can say for example, the most beautiful accepted border crossing is that the issuance of the border crossing pass. There is to accommodate the people, the local inhabitants' needs. But also I have showed the contested in here where there is a tension between the border locals' intentions and the state rules, but not necessarily putting the state at risk. So this is the kind of contested that I mean. So who decides? It will come down to these actual border crossing intentions on the event itself when it happens. So, and I think that would be my answer for your first question, and then. To your second question, would you mind to rephrase in chapter 6?
Well, I can rephrase it in a very easy way. Do you think the community has a different framework to legitimize mobility compared to the state?
I would argue that there might be some differences, but it would not really significantly change how I provided my theoretical framework now, because the idea of being the Krayan people, who is also an Indonesian citizen that is a member of the Indonesian state per se, that brings implications how this embeddedness of being Indonesian at the same time being local actually affect how the perceptions of the border crossing, whether it is good or not good. So yes, I do admit that I'm focusing on the state, and this is based on the fact that I'm focusing on the state border instead of any other border forms that coexist in Krayan region.
Thank you.
I think that would be my answer.
I think that's a convincing answer. So thank you. as the last opponent of today, I have the honor also to bring you to the very end of this ceremony. You know, like we need to win time now a little bit, Lydia, together. And therefore, I'm moving to chapter 6 at the very beginning, page 157. And I would like to read out, also because there is an audience today, I would like to read out a beautiful quote by Pak David, I think. Actually, half of the people who live on the other side of the border of Sarawak and Sabah are our people, just like my family, my mother's siblings live there. And I wonder, and there's somebody entering the room, maybe you don't notice, but we see her. I wonder if this is the only borderlander you can speak of. And because also in the table on page 133, you speak about foreign travelers, not being local. So who are these foreigners in this borderland? Can you
The defense is hereby concluded. I give the floor once again to the candidate.
Having defended my dissertation to the best of my ability, I would like to thank the rector, my supervisor, my co-supervisors, as well as those who have honored the ceremony with their presence.
The doctoral examination board retreats for its deliberations. On behalf of the doctoral board of Radboud University Nijmegen, we have decided to award you the degree of doctor. I invite Professor Ernste to discharge the task assigned to him.
Okay. Lydia, in the name of the Lord, with the power entrusted by the law of the doctorate board, I hereby confer upon you, Lidya Sitohang, born in Kutai Kartanegara, the title of doctor from the Radboud University Nijmegen, to which are attached all the associated legal and customary rights and duties with respect to the academia and society. As proof thereof, I present you, this time a little bit symbolically, to you this doctoral diploma, signed by the rector and the doctoral thesis supervisors and co-supervisors.
Please sit down. Please go ahead with the laudatio.
Honorable Lady, Dr. Sitohang, as we can address you from now on. Dear Lydia, here we are, or better, here we are, and unfortunately, there you are. You have arrived at the end of your doctoral rights and adventures. This is the end of, also for us as supervisors, really a rewarding trip. Of course, we do have to acknowledge it was quite a long trip, but that gave us all the more time to enjoy each other's company. The length of the ride was not caused by taking any detours from the start. I think you have been on the target where you are now. The length of the trip, in our impression, is rather expressing the fact that you have been striving for the best. Of course, you had your moments of doubts, and we felt sometimes that we had to encourage you and spur you on. There is a Dutch saying, wat goed is, komt snel. So things that are good come quickly, but we do not believe that this is the only truth. The good needs often time to ripen, and your thesis and defense today is the result of this ripening process, and verily, it is a very tasty outcome. You started the thesis in the context of the multidisciplinary research project New Indonesian Frontiers, which was initiated by our dear colleague Edwin de Jong. And as the member of the Nijmegen Center for Border Research, we wholeheartedly joined this project, of course, triggered by the concept of frontiers. And the nice thing about concepts is that they are always contextual, both in a disciplinary sense as well as a geographical sense. As geographical border scholars, we are especially interested in the territorial aspects and expression of borders. And as the project was geographically located in Kalimantan, it seemed logically to take the physical Indonesian-Malaysian border as the case. You embarked on the project together with, if I'm correct, 6 Indonesian colleagues, all dealing with a wide variety of topics, but united by the interpretation of the frontier concept. This concept is in a literal and figurative sense pointing at the final outreach of processes, an outreach where there is supposed to be room for expansion and where two frontiers meet or collide. All kinds of interesting dynamics are taking place. In your case, as you mentioned, you chose Krayan as the study area, and you looked upon it in particular as the frontier and national border of the Indonesian state, inhabited by people that often have quite different interpretations of this border as well as the border region. Being from Kalimantan, you were very much aware of the fact that the people living in this region sometimes felt misunderstood and misrepresented, especially by the central government in Jakarta. And you also knew already that this region, when it comes to regional economic development, is certainly not in the top tier in Indonesia, together with the fact that historically there is a lot of cross-border interaction going on. The main topic of your thesis was quickly determined. What, if at all, is the relationship between regional development and cross-border interaction? As an engaged social scientist, you've proven that in your defense you developed quickly great empathy and also sympathy for the people living in the region. And sometimes we had to remind you that you are primarily working on a project to understand what is going on in this region and should try, how difficult it be and if it's possible at all, to be the independent and objective researchers as much as possible. So every now and then you shared with us that you felt a certain obligation towards your respondents from all segments of society, that is the local regional government, NGOs, heads of villages, inhabitants, etc., an obligation to come with concrete recommendations how to deal with, especially the central government, to improve the regional economic circumstances. We sometimes had to curb you a bit, your activist attitude. Well, from now on, you can go all the way and deploy your advanced knowledge for the betterment of this region. Just as we had discussions on how you could or should relate to your case, we also had lively discussions on the topic of nationalism. At a certain point in your project, you introduced this term, and in our discussion, it became clear that this is also very contextual and region-specific. So in some cases, it also can become quite loaded. You use the term in the sense of your subtitle, Garuda is on my chest, Malaysia is in my stomach. You felt it unfair that inhabitants of the region were accused of not being loyal to the Indonesian state whenever crossing into Malaysia for social visit or to obtain certain products and services that were not or less available on the Indonesian side. And the fact that the term is still prominently present in your thesis is an expression of another trait, your tenacity. This is something that will serve you well in future research and other activities, and it also forced us to think fundamentally about our own stance regarding the topics we discussed. Thank you for that, and I'll pass on to Lothar.
Honourable Lady, Dr. Sitohang, and especially Lidya. What a proud moment. A proud moment for you and for your family and your friends and for the many colleagues who have stood by your side in the last years, sharing an office with you, or else your friendly smile as you walk down the corridors, on your way to the photocopying machine perhaps, or Martin's office for yet another quick question. And to be sure, Martin and I, and of course Haup as your former promoter, are also most proud of you. Well done. Martin already remarked how sometimes knowledge needs to be contextualized, needs to find the right place, needs to ripen, and that's a process that every PhD project, but also PhD researchers themselves have encountered. And we were glad you, but also we generally, had the patience, except for some more final moments when you struggled to keep going financially, and thereby also had less energy for this project to define what the right moment would be at which we would let you and your dissertation venture into the wide world on their firm own feet. This is that moment. Indeed, that moment has been truly reached, because look at your dissertation. I've proudly taken it along to Bilbao, where I was last week, under the pretext of reading it, but actually just to show it off. And that I did. And I also hope that you, and perhaps also many others, will do the same. And not only in this month, but for many years to come. And of course, not only to stop there, but to continue to explore many of the open ends that are still there in your research. And I believe we've already heard one or two suggestions for how to go on with this. So that's great. Over the years, you've matured in many ways. Perhaps sometimes tiring of the endless critical engagement, let's call it that, we had with your work, but also enjoying these moments as they develop from perhaps perceived tests of your intellectual capacity to make sense of yet another woolly sentence, that would be me, or perhaps a tentatively formulated one like Martin with his in that sense and that sense, or this confusing hub and spokes. I still don't know what that is about. As we grew as a team over the years, so too did the opportunity for more informal exchanges, and I certainly enjoyed some of the spontaneous parties that were held at my house by a gang of cheerful PhDs on a Friday evening. I'd like to think that it was not only because of the strategic location of my house, and perhaps my being a bachelor at that point, that made me that lucky person. Yet at moments you would also revert back to formal language, and especially in the many emails we've exchanged over the years. Indeed, only in recent mails we were given evidence yet of another fantastic final greeting to a long email, and no doubt others in this organization will also recognize Lydia's signature. Thank you for your concern in this matter, which is such a far cry from the "hey guys" with which you would sometimes greet us as you walked into a meeting. So after many years, we've come to know Lydia as a truly warm and caring person, bringing unexpected offerings of delicious food. I have been one of the recipients of that. We have come to know you as an open person, readily sharing long anecdotes, and I think we've seen plenty of evidence of that today, from the field which we were then forced to digest, but also as a heartily stubborn person. And I think back to many long discussions that we had, Martin was just referring to it as well, in its extended speech on nationalism and what nationalism is, but also to the corrections and the recorrections of many edited chapters. It's been a long process, but it's been a good process. So I've come to know you as an expressive presence in the Eleanor Ostrom building, but also sometimes as somewhat introverted and removed, quietly tucked away under massive earphones in the corner of your shared office. But all in all, I think we've all come to know you as you are, and I think that's the most important part. Unfortunately, some events have impacted you along the way, and I'm hereby relating particularly, of course, to the sudden, sad loss of your dear junior sister in the middle of 2019. It was at this moment that many others stood up to stand by you in a very trying moment. And we would like to here again extend our thanks to the community at your church, the Indonesian Student Association, Nijmegen, and to many others in this department, including our secretariat, Yol and Yvonne, for the support they gave you then. Your PhD has given you many friends, and with the final leg, it may have been hard, and you may feel that you've even lost a few along the way as you had to devote your final attention to your PhD dissertation. But I think that many of those have turned out to be enduring. And I know that what is not present in this room is present elsewhere in the virtual spaces that we now occupy. I know from quite a few people that they're actually attending this place through another channel. So that's great. And so finally, it's with much honor that Haup, Martin, and I were part of your research team. And we hope that you will continue to work with us for many years. We do have an article or two to still complete, so that gives us a great occasion. For now, enjoy your massive achievement. and we will definitely toast your success here and hope that at some point in the future, whether this is Indonesia or here in Nijmegen, we'll find a moment to clink our glasses together in further celebration. Thank you.
On behalf of the doctoral board, I also really like Dr. Lidya to congratulate you with this major achievement. I also want to congratulate you on behalf of the people here behind the counter or desk, how you want to say it. Also on behalf of the people sitting here in the room, and on behalf of the people online through Zoom with this major achievement. Well done. It's too bad it's by Zoom largely, for you in particular, and I wish you all the best. Please rise. Gratias tibu agumus omnipotus Deus pro omnibus beneficituis qui vivis eragnes per omnia saecula saeculorum.